welcome to my channel as always. If you like hearing me ramble about my passions in life, be it the Beatles or my love of movies, my love of music, and my love of physical media, please hit that subscribe button and hit the bell notification so you can find out when I will eventually go and make the next video. Today I'm going to talk about my thoughts on the Godfather Trilogy, the set that I did the unboxing of last week. And I have quite a lot of thoughts on this. So let me just get right into it. I initially had a number of problems with this set, in particular the first film. But I came around, and I'm going to tell you about how I came to that way of thinking. Now, in 2007, a massive restoration was completed by Robert Harris. And in my opinion, Robert Harris is a miracle worker when you find out the movies that he restored. Lawrence of Arabia in 1989, Spartacus in 90 when it came out, My Fair Lady in 94, Hitchcock's Vertigo. So when it was announced that he was doing the restoration, I immediately got excited. I mean, if anybody's going to do their due diligence on this, it's Robert Harris. And in 2008, the first Blu-ray set I ever got was the Godfather, the Coppola restoration, signed off by Francis Ford Coppola. Now, that was a 4K restoration of The Godfather and Godfather Part 2. Godfather Part 3 didn't need anything. The negative was still in good shape, so they just went and remastered it, is essentially what they did. But Part 1 and Part 2, or The Godfather and Godfather Part 2, they did an extensive restoration, working with Gordon Willis, the original cinematographer, working with Coppola. And on the Blu-ray set, there's a very good documentary with Robert Harris where he explains the process. Now, initially, I was worried about the Godfather films coming to 4K UHD. But that set was a 4K restoration down-resed to 1080p for Blu-ray. But it was the first 4K restoration, and while Robert Harris was completing that, Grover Crisp of Sony Home Video was in New York working on a 4K restoration of Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove. I liked that because I believe everything Robert Harris says, and I believed what Gordon Willis was saying at the time. But I understand tastes change and equipment changes and negatives change. What they can do changes. This set is a full restoration. It is another restoration. They did not just do a remastering and slap the words restored on it. This is a full-on restoration. And they found more of the original negative this time. More than what Robert Harris was able to find back in the 2000s. They found more of the original negative. In fact, they found a lot of the original opticals. So you're seeing for the first time the dissolves and the fade-outs the way they were originally conceived, as opposed to having had to remake them. But I was initially skeptical of this release. Now, Robert Harris on HomeTheaterForum.com, he gave it a rave review, a bite very diplomatic. Bill Hunt at thedigitalbits.com, another guy I like, he praised it. A number of people that I respect had praised it. So I couldn't wait. Robert Harris did go and make some mention about he thought they tinkered with the color. Now, but he also said the 2007 restoration had an extra point of red on it. Originally, Gordon Willis had said that the Godfather films, as far as color goes, it's 2 points yellow, 1 point red throughout the entire trilogy. Well, an extra point of red was put in there. I put the disc for the first Godfather in, and it's looking incredible. It's looking, oh my gosh. Now, I saw this at the Dolby Cinema at AMC, and on the big screen it looked phenomenal. I'm watching this, enjoying it. In fact, the wedding scenes look a bit more like what they were talking about. Anscochrome photos from the late 40s and the 50s. I think the 2007 is a bit more saturated, but this looks like true Anscochrome color. That's what it was supposed to be. Very blown out whites, blown out reds. But as I was watching this, something kept creeping in my head. Did they reduce the grain? I see grain. I see detail. Now let me say something here. A lot of people think people like myself who are grain fanatics like the grain because it's a purist attitude that we have towards these movies. They were grainy, they should be grainy. For me, that's not truly the thing. When you remove film grain, when you do digital noise reduction, scrubbing that picture clean, you could remove detail. Check out the very first Blu-ray edition of Predator with Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger looks like a Pixar character. He's got a very waxy look to him. The grain hides details. Sometimes it's because of the grain you could see the pockmarks on somebody's face in a close-up. It's because if you remove the grain you could lose detail like patterns on suits or shirts, leaves on the trees. So I'm watching this, I'm seeing detail, and I'm seeing what appears to be some grain. But something about it doesn't look right. I'm seeing some digital anomalies. And then I immediately go to hometheaterforum.com and notice that people are calling out a lot of different things to the point where it's like they're calling out the color. They're saying this was horrible. How could they allow this to happen? They're calling this a restoration. It's not a restoration. And more I'm hearing these people, the more it's influencing my thinking. So then I decided to watch the first Godfather again, and then I watched Godfather Part 2. And especially with the first Godfather, I had to take some things into consideration, which allowed me to form my own opinion. Now, first off, the Godfather film, the first Godfather, is one of the most overly loved negatives in film history. And what do I mean by overly loved? Every time they needed a new print, anytime an edit for television, Godfather, the complete novel for television, the Godfather complete epic, Abbott and Costello meet the Godfather, whatever. Everything was ran off the original negatives. And over time, the negatives started to deteriorate. They started to replace sections with dupe prints. They started to do dupes of dupes, and there were a lot of things that really started to tear that negative apart, but they weren't doing anything about it. They would just make a new print off that old deteriorating print and maybe do some color filtering or whatever, and then you got your new version of The Godfather. 25th anniversary edition that came out in 1997 is a prime example, and there's a lot of mistakes in that I didn't know about at the time, but I was happy to see it on the big screen and happy to get my THX certified widescreen VHS set of that. So it's an overly loved negative. 2, Gordon Willis as a cinematographer is very tricky. He always liked to work with a fully exposed negative. He liked to work with the negative to the point where nobody could mess with that negative. And his negatives, especially The Godfather, they wind up very thin because there's hardly any emulsion on the film negative. So I kind of thought The Godfather on 4K UHD with full HDR or Dolby Vision was going to be a very tricky affair. That's why I would be very skeptical if Criterion decided to reissue the Parallax View starring Warren Beatty or Clute with Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland. Two brilliant films directed by Alan Pakula. He had a long relationship with Pakula, even going into the early 90s with Presumed Innocent with Harrison Ford. Those he shot anamorphic, and those have that style too. They don't have the yellowish tint, but they are very dark, hardly any exposure in the negatives. Another great collaborator during his great period as a filmmaker, let's stress that point, Woody Allen. His great period beginning with Annie Hall and ending with The Purple Rose of Cairo, all shot by Gordon Willis. So with the state of the negatives, even based on the 2007 restoration, I knew this was going to be a tricky affair. Definitely tricky. Again, one of the pluses is that they were able to find more of the original negative this time than what they were able to find in 2007. And what the makers of this restoration said was they used Robert Harris's digital cinema package as the basis for what they did here. Did they change the color? I'm not sure. Because on one hand, Robert Harris was taking Gordon Willis's word at the way the color scheme was for the film. 2 points yellow, 1 point red. But then again, I'm sure Robert Harris had color timing notes and things like that. Did they kind of modernize it? I don't think so either. It still looks like a film that came out in the 70s. Is there grain reduction? Yes, there is. And my friend Aaron pointed that out to me as well. But considering everything, the state of the negative, trying to bring out more detail and getting this to 4K UHD, I'm going to tell you right now, this is an amazing release. I'm going to say it. A lot of the anomalies, if there are, would not be noticeable to the average viewer. And this was a miracle, I think, to get on 4K UHD in the state that it is. I think it's an amazing release. I think I'm seeing more detail now in the suits and the close-ups. Are there some digital anomalies, like I said? Yes, there are. But they're not an annoyance. They're not an annoyance. You could still keep your 2007, which I am, but I'm starting to think more and more this might be my go-to. Godfather Part 2 is very good. I don't think there should be any issue with that, but people are talking about Part 2 as well. Godfather Coda, which is the new cut of Godfather Part 3, the new cut of that was done recently, and of course the film came out in 1990, so you're dealing with a much more newer negative, newer film stock. The two Godfather films, Godfather and Godfather Part 2, were shot with Mitchell B&C cameras and Bosch & Lomb lenses. Godfather Part 3 was shot with Panavision Panaflex cameras with the negative being Super 35 and framed at a 1:8:5 aspect ratio. So that's a bit more of a newer negative, but that looks brilliant. But I gotta say, I'm impressed with what they did. And when you take all of that into consideration, this is a very good release. I'm not going to badmouth this release, and I'm not going to let any other opinion influence me. Yes, I understand the gripes, but we have two great editions of this, and I like this edition. The wedding scene in particular, for me, looks better than the 2007 restoration. And as much as I love Robert Harris and I respect his opinion on things, there are some things about even his restoration that I questioned. I always questioned the first shot of Marlon Brando in the film. I always felt it was a bit fuzzy, and when he moved his head, I saw what I call travel shadows, if that makes sense. He's moving his head, but you see still a bit of it linger, if that makes any sense. So I did have issues with that version as well, but I loved it. But I love this too. And I'm going to be watching more of this. It's an incredible release. I don't want to say it's the best release of 2022 as of yet. It might be one of my favorites, but we still have a lot of incredible releases yet to come. In particular, Warner Archive releasing Singin' in the Rain on 4K UHD. I'm astounded to see that. Beautiful 3-strip Technicolor right there. But this is an incredible release. So if you are having misgivings about it, still get it. Still support the work. And, you know, it's a good release. I'm not going to complain. They look beautiful to me. They might be new, but I like this new version, this new restoration. There you go. That's my take on this. Please give me some of your thoughts, and I know that there are people out there who will have their opinions on this release, but give me your opinions. Put them down in the comments. I try and respond to everybody, and I've talked to a lot of people here a number of times, so if I don't respond immediately, please forgive me. But thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.